Chapter 4 of the Pawns in the Game: The Downfall of Napoleon. The secret international bankers planned the French Revolution so they could become the secret power behind the governments of Europe and further their long-range plans. With the outbreak of revolution in the Jacobins took over control. They were men who had been handpicked by the Illuminati and Grand Orient Masonry. They used the Duc d'Orléans to serve their purpose right up to the time he was required to vote for the death of his cousin, the king. The Duke believed he would be made the constitutional monarch, but the Jacobins had other instructions. Once he had voted for the death of the king, and assumed the blame, he left the real plotters free from suspicion. Then those who compromised the secret power behind the revolutionary ordered him liquidated also. They switched the full force of their propaganda and l'infamie against him. In an unbelievably short time, he was on his way to the guillotine. While riding over the cobblestones on the death cart, he heard himself revealed and execrated by all classes of the people. Once Mirabeau realized what the terrible instruments of vengeance he had helped to bring into being, he repented. Wild and desolate as he had been, he just couldn't stomach witnessing the terrible and shocking atrocities which the Jacobins were systemically perpetrating on all those who were fingered for outrage and death by their secret masters. Mirabeau was actually opposed to any violence being done to the king. His personal plan had been to reduce Louis XVI to a limited monarch and then have himself anointed as his chief advisor. When he realized that his masters were determined to king the king, he tried to arrange for Louis to escape from Paris, so he could place himself under the protection of the loyal generals who still commanded his army. When his plans were betrayed to the Jacobins, Mirabeau was ordered liquidated also. In his plan, a public execution could not be arranged because his enemies did not consider they had time to frame charges against him and make them stick. So he was poisoned. His death was made to look like suicide. A book was written about the diamond necklace already referred to. It is the significant remark. Louis was not ignorant of the fact that Mirabeau had been poisoned. Danton and Robespierre were the two devils incarnates who stepped up the reign of terror designated by the Illuminati to give them revenge upon their enemies and to remove persons they considered obstacles in their path. Yet, when they had served their purpose, the two chief executioners were arrested and charged of their many infamies, and they then executed. Lafayette was a Mason. He was a good man. He joined the revolutionary forces because he honestly believed revolutionary action was necessary to bring about the much needed reforms speedily. But Lafayette never thought for a moment he was leading the people of France from their old oppression into a new subjugation. When he tried to save the king, he was packed off to fight a war in Austria. Since the French Revolution of 1789, upon up to the revolutions going on today, the secret power behind them have used many Duc d'Orléans, Mirabeaus, and Lafayettes. Although the men have borne different names, they have all been used as tools and played similar parts. They have been used to foam the revolutions, and after having served their purpose, they have been liquidated by the very men they served. Their deaths were always so arranged that they die under a blanket of guilt, which should rightfully have covered the shoulders of the men who still remain the secret power behind the scenes of in international intrigue. Sir Walter Scott understood a great deal about how the secret power behind the French Revolution worked. Any person who reads the life of Napoleon will sense that the author thought he detected the Jewish origin of the plots. Sir Walter points out that the real key figures in the revolution were mostly foreigners. He observed that they used typically Jewish name terms such as directors and elders in their work. He pointed out that a man named Manuel was in some mysterious manner appointed procurers of the commune. Sir Walter states that this one man was responsible for the arrest and detention in prisons all over France of the victims of the prearranged massacres which took place in September 1792. During the massacres, 8,000 victims were murdered in the prisons of Paris alone. Sir Walter also noted that the Communauté de Paris, the Paris County Council, became the Sanhedrin of the Jacobins who cried for bloody blood and more blood. Scott relates that until they had served their purpose, Robespierre, Danton, and Marat shared the high places in the synagogue of the Jacobins. My emphasis. It was Manuel who sparked the attack against King Louis and Marie Antoinette, which finally led them to the guillotine. Manuel was well supported by a man named David, who, as a leading member of the Committee of Public Security, tried Manuel's many victims. Dan David's voice also called for blood and death. So Walter records that David used to prefer his bloody work of the day of the professional phase. Let us grind enough of the red. It was David who introduced the cult of the supreme being. The heaven ritual was Kabbalistic mummery, which was substituted for every external sign of racial devotion. Scott also mentions that Choderlos de Laclos, thought to have been of Spanish origin, was manager of the Palais Royal, which played such a devilish part in his preparations for the outbreak of the revolution. Another matter of importance is this: Robespierre had been ordered two men two men named Robel and Gochid were appointed directors of the Council of Elders. With three others, they became the actual governments of France for a time. The five men referred to were known as the da- directories. It is a very remarkable fact that Sir Walter Scott's Life of Napoleon, in 9 volumes, which reveals so much of the real truth, is practically unknown. Mention must be made of G. Reiner's Life of Robespierre. He writes as if some of the secrets were known to him. He says, from April 27th to the July 28th, 1784, when Robespierre was defeated, the reign of terror was at its height. It was never a dictatorship of a single man, least of all Robespierre. Some 20 men shared in the power. Then again, on July 28th, Robespierre made a long speech before the convention, a, Phili- a Philippic against ultra-terrorists, during which he uttered vague and general accusations. Robespierre is quoted to have said, "I dare not name them at this moment and in this place. I cannot bring myself entirely to tear asunder the veil that covers this profound mystery of iniquity, but I can affirm most positively that amongst the authors of this plot are the agents of the system of corruption and extravagance, the most powerful of all the means invented by the foreigners for the undoing of the Republic. I mean, to imper apostles of atheism and the immorality that is its base." Mr. Reiner added, had he, Robespierre, not spoken these words, he might have still triumphed. Robespierre had said too much. He deliberately shot in the jaw to silence him effectively. He was deliberately shot in the jaw to silence him effectively until he could be dragged to the guillotine the following day. Thus, another Mason who knew too much was deposed of. As the events which led up to the Russian and Spanish revolutions were reviewed, it will be shown that the hidden revolutionary section of the Illuminati within the Grand Orient lodges of the Continental Freemasonry was the instrument of the men who constituted the secret power behind the world revolutionary movements. Thousands of individuals are publicly blamed, and many revolutions brought into saddled disrepute simply because it was within the power of the secret leaders of the WRM to saddle them with the blame for their crimes and thus conceal their own identity. There are not many people living today who know that Robespierre, Marat, and Danton were only the instruments used by the 13 directors of the Illuminati who plotted and directed the Great French Revolution. It was the men behind the scene who preconceived the patterns of the Reign of Terror as the means of gratifying their desire for revenge. Only during a reign of terror could they remove human obstacles from their path. Having run out of victims, the men who directed the French Revolution decided to engage in international intrigue again for the purpose of increasing their economic and political power. Anselm Mayer Rothschild trained his son Nathan Mayer for for the special purpose of opening up a house of Rothschild in London, England. His intention was to consolidate more strongly than ever the connections between the men who controlled the Bank in England and those who controlled the banks of France, Germany, and Holland. Nathan undertook his important task at the age of 21. He tripled his fortune. The bankers then decided to use Napoleon as the instrument of their will. They organized the Napoleonic Wars to topple several more crowned heads of Europe. After Napoleon swept over Europe, he pronounced himself emperor in 1804. He appointed his brother Joseph king of Naples, Louis king of Holland, Jerome king of Westphalia. At the same time, the Nathan Rothschild arranged matters so that his four brothers became the kings of financial finance in Europe. They were the secret power behind the newly established thrones. The international moneylenders set up headquarters in Switzerland. It was agreed between them that in their interests and for the security, Switzerland should be kept neutral in all disputes. In their Swiss headquarters at Geneva, they organized the different combines and cartels on an international scale. They arranged things so that no matter who fought who or who won and who lost, the members of the international moneylenders pool made more and more money. The group of men soon obtained control of the munition plants and shipbuilding industry, the mining industry, chemical plants, drugs supply depots, steel mills, etc. The only fly in the ointment was the fact that Napoleon grew more and more egotistic until he finally had the temerity to denounce them publicly. Thus, he also decided his own fate. It was not the weather nor the cold that turned his victorious invasion of Russia into one of the most strategic military defeats the world had ever known. The failure of munition and supplies to reach his army was due to the sabotaging of his lines of communication. The secret strategy used to defeat Napoleon and force his abdication has been accepted as essential for all revolutionary efforts since that date. It is very simple. The leaders of the revolutionary movement arranged they place their agents secretly in key positions in the departments of supply, communication, transport, and intelligence of the armed forces they planned to overthrow by sabotaging supplies, intercepting orders, ensuing contradictory messages, tying up or misrouting transports, and by counterintelligence work, revolutionary leaders have discovered they can create utter chaos in the most efficient military organization on land or at sea or in the air. 10 cells secretly placed at key positions are worth 10,000 men in the battlefield. The method used to bring Napoleon to ruin in the early part of the 19th century were used to bring about the defeat of the Russian armies in the war against Japan in 1904, and again to cause mutiny in the Russian armies in 1907, the mutiny of the German army and navy in 1918. Communists infiltrated into key positions was the real reason the German generals asked for and were granted the armistice in 1918. The same methods were used to destroy the effectiveness of the Spanish army, navy, and air force in 1936. Exactly the same tactics were used to bring about the defeat of Hitler after his victorious advances into Russia in World War II. Thus, history repeats itself because the same power used the same methods over and over again. But most important of all, it was the descendants of the men who brought about Napoleon's downfall, who brought about the defeat of China's national forces in 1945 and onwards. Mysterious orders were given which caused millions upon millions of dollars worth of arms and ammunition to be dumped into the Indian Ocean when they should have gone to Chiang Kai shek. The true story of the manner in which British and American politicians portrayed our anti communist Chinese and Korean allies will prove that it was the agents of the international bankers maneuvering to let communism obtain control of Asia, who deceived and ill advised our top level statesmen. Communism is today what it always has been since 1773, the instruments of destruction and the manual of action used by the international art conspirators to further their own secret plans, by which, in the final analysis, they intend to obtain control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. History records how Napoleon was forced to abdicate in Paris in 1814. Then he was sent into exile in St. Elba. He escaped and tried to make a comeback, but he was playing against men who use loaded dice. Nathan Rothschild and his international clinic. He backed Germany to defeat Napoleon. They had planned to make money regardless of the outcome of the struggle. When the Battle of Waterloo was about to be fought, Nathan Rothschild was in Paris. He had obtained as his place of residence a palace that which overlooked that occupied by Louis the Sixth, Louis the 18th. He could, when he wished, look right into the window of the palace occupied by the aspirants to the throne of France. He had arranged also to have agents on the field of battle dispatch to him by carrier pigeon information regarding the fighting. Nathan Rothschild also arranged to have false information sent to England by carrier pigeons regarding the result of the battle. Once he was sure Wellington had been victorious, he had his agents inform the British public that Wellington had been defeated and that Napoleon was on the rampage again. The fact that the carrier pigeons played such an important role in the conspiracy gave birth to the expression, a little bird told me. If a person in England asked another, where did you get the information? The person questioned will most likely say, oh, a little bird told me, and let it go at that. Nathan Rothschild's little birds told lies of such magnitude regarding the Battle of Waterloo that the people of Britain went into panic. The bottom dropped out of the stock market. English pounds could be bought for a song or a shilling. Values of everything fell to an all-time low. Nathan chartered up a small vessel for the sum of £2,000 to take him from France to England. Upon arrival, he and his financial associates bought up all the stock, bonds, shares, and other properties and securities they could get their hands on. When the truth regarding Wellington's victory became known, values returned to normal. The international moneylenders had made astronomical fortunes. Why they were not associated by the sum of the people they ruined is beyond comprehension. As a token of their joy and gratitude for the marvelous feats of arms performed by Wellington and Boulcher, the Rothschilds loaned England £18 million sterling, and Prussia £5 million sterling of this ill-gotten gain to repair the damages of war. When Nathan Rothschild died in 1836, he had secured control of the Bank of England and the national debt, which, after his big financial killing in 1815, reached £885 million sterling. It is most unlikely that one Freemason in 1,000 knows the true story of how the heads of the Grand Orient Illuminati infiltrated their agents into continental Freemasonry. Because the facts related are the truth, the Grand Masters of England Freemasons have warned their brother Mason that they must have no truck with Grand Orient Masons or affiliates with them in any way. The fact that the revolutionary Illuminati established itself within continental Freemasonry caused Pope Pius IX to publicly denounce communism and prohibit Catholics from becoming Masons. To convince any reader who may still have doubts regarding the part Freemasonry played in the French Revolution, part of a debate which took place on the subject of the French Chamber of Deputies in 1904, still will be quoted. The Marquis of Rosenb, after some searching questions related to proving French Masonry, was the author of the revolution. The Marquis of Rosanne, after some searching questions related to proving French Masonry was author of the French Revolution, said, "We are in we are then in complete agreement on the point that Masonry was the only author of the Revolution, and apostle the applause which I receive from the left, and to which I am little accustomed, proves, gentlemen, that you acknowledge with me that it was Masonry which made the French Revolution." To this statement, Mr. Jumel, a well-known Grand Orient Mason, replied, we do more than acknowledge it, we proclaim it." In 1923, at a big banquet attended by many men prominent in international affairs, some of whom were connected with the Leagues of Nations organized, the president of the Grand Orient gave this toast: "To the French Republic, daughter of French Masonry, to the Universal Republic of tomorrow, daughter of the Universal Masonry." To prove that the Grand Orient Freemasons have controlled French politics from 1923 onwards, a brief overview of historical events will be given. The most important victory of the international bankers' gains after their agents had acted as advisors to the political leaders who devised and finally ratified the infamous Treaty of Versailles, was to have Mr. Harriot elected to power in France in 1924. Every political policy dictated by the heads of the Grand Orient Freemasonry in 1923 was put into effect by the Harriet government within a year. Number one, in January 1923, the GOL, Grand Orient Lodges, decreed the suppression of the embassy of the Vatican. The French Parliament carried out this order October 24th, 1924. And two, in 1923, the GOL demanded the triumph of the idea of laïcité. This is the primary principle essential to the establishment of the Grand Orient ideology of the atheistic states. Harriet made this public administration declaration in Harriet made this his public ministerial declaration in favor of this policy June 17th, 1924. 3. On January 31st, 1923, the GOL demanded a full and complete amnesty for the condemned persons and traitors. Several prominent communist leaders were to benefit, amongst them Marty, who afterwards became a notorious and organizer and as the organizer of the international brigades, which fought on the communist side in Spain 1936-1939. The Chamber of Deputies voted for the general amnesty July 15th, 1924, and thus turned loose on an unsuspecting society a number of international gangsters whose master was the Supreme Council of the Grand Orient Masonry, the Illuminati. 4. In October 1922, the GOL had started a campaign to popularize the idea that diplomatic relations be opened with the Soviet government as established in Moscow. This movement didn't get very far until the election of Mr. Harriet to power. This friendship with Russia campaign was started in France when the Bulletin official de la Grande Loge de France published an article on the subject in the October issue of 1922 on page 286. Political relations were established with the communist revolutionary leaders by Harriet on October 28th, 1924. The same forces of evil are advocating the recognition of Red China today. One of the leaders of the Grand Orient at this time was Leo Blum. He was being primed to become a political instrument ready to do the bidding of his leaders. High-ranking members of the military lodges in Spain who defected after they found out they were being used as tools by leaders of the WRM disclosed that every Grand Orient Mason that required to take the oath of unlimited obedience to the head of the Council of 33 and to recognize no human as above him. An oath of this kind taken by an avowed atheist literally means that he recognizes the states as above everything else, and the head of the state as his god. A great deal of detail about the Grand Orient intrigue in France and Japan from 1923 to 1939 is told in the Spanish arena by William Voss and Cecile Grehati, and published by the Wrights Book Club, London, England, 1939. To establish continuity of the international bankers plot, it is sufficient to touch on just a few highlights. Leo Blum was born in Paris in 1872 of Jewish parents. He was noted for the part he played in the Dreyfus affair. He was elected French premier June 1936. He retained office until June 1937. He was re-elected in March and remained until April of 1937. His supporters managed to get him back into politics as vice premier June 1937 to January 1938. Mendez France is being used in the same way today. During the whole this time, Leo Blum's task was to mold French government policy so that it would aid the plans of the leaders of the WRM in regard to Spain. In order to throw suspicion away from themselves, the arch conspirators made it appear that it was Franco and his military associates who were the planners and plotters of the events which led up to the civil war in Spain. It is now proved that Stalin and his revolutionary experts in the Comintern were the conspirators who carried out the plans of the secret power behind the WRM. They planned to duplicate what they had achieved in both the French Revolution in 1789 and the Russian Revolution in 1917. As early as 1929, M. Gustave pointed out in his paper La Victoire the truth regarding Le Blum. The collectivist party of Le Blum, the second branch of Freemasonry, is not only anti-religious but a party of class war and social revolution. Le Blum puts into effect the plans of the leaders of the WRM to supply Spanish loyalists with arms, munition, and finances. He was instrumental in keeping the Pyrenees open, but he followed a one-side policy of non-intervention. It only applied to the nationalists and of Franco's forces. Evidence is produced in the chapters dealing with the revolution in Spain to prove that the French and Spanish Grand Orient lodges were the line of communication between the directors of the WRM and their agents in Moscow, Madrid, and Vienna. Should the reader think too much importance is being placed under the Grand Orient Masonry, has an international affairs, A.G. Michael, author of La dictature de la franc-maçonnerie sur la France, gives evidence to prove that the Grand Orient of France decreed in 1924 to make the secret the League of Nations an international tool of Freemasonry. Trossi wrote in his book Stalin. Today, there is a Tower of Babel at the service of Stalin, and one of its principal centers is Geneva, the hotbed of intrigue. The importance of what Trossi says lies in the fact that the accusations he made regarding the evil influence of the Grand Orient Masons within the League of Nations applies equally to the bad influence they have in the United Nations today. The student who studies today's happenings in the United Nations will see their handwork, especially in regard to strange policies, which just don't make sense to the average man in the streets. But these strange policies becomes extremely clear if they study to see how they will further the long-range plan of the WRM. To do this, we only have to remember one or two important facts. First, that the Illuminati consider it necessary to destroy all existing forms of constitutional government, regardless of whether they be monarchy or republic. Second, that they intend to introduce a world dictatorship just as soon as they consider they are securely in position to usurp absolute control. M.J. Marquez Riviere had this to say. The center of the International Freemasons is at Geneva. The offices of the International Masonic Association are at Geneva. This is the meeting place of the delegates of nearly all the forms of Masonry throughout the world. The interpretation of the League and the IMA is easy, apparent, and confessed. One can well understand the exclamation in 1924 by Brother Gracia, past Grand Master of the Spanish or Grand Orients, at the Covenant of the Grand Orients when he returned to Geneva. I have assisted at the work of the commissioners. I have heard Paul Boncourt, Je haut le chœur de Juvenal. All the French had the same spirit. Beside me were representatives of the American Freemasons, and they asked each other, "Are we in secular assembly or a Masonic order?" Brother Joseph Avenal is the Secretary General of the League. It is well to remember that the International Illuminati chose Geneva as their headquarters nearly a century before the event was recorded. They had, in accordance with their policy, kept Switzerland a neutral nation in all international disputes because they had to make one place where they could meet and instruct their agents who were doing the biddings and carrying out their secret policies. The United States government refused to join the League of Nations. Certain interests promoted the isolationist policy. The secret powers were determined to exploit those who honestly support the idea of a one world form of super government to assure peace and prosperity. They were determined to wreck the League of Nations and substitute the United Nations. The World War II gave them this opportunity. In 1946, the remnants of the League of Nations were picked up and used in a quilted pattern of the United Nations, which included the USSR and USA as the two most powerful members. The fact that the United Nations gave Israel to the political Zionists, which they had been after over a half a century, and on the advice of these same men turned over China, North Korea, Manchuria, Mongolia, the Dutch East Indies, and parts of Indochina to communist leaders proves how successfully the secret powers laid and carried out their plans. It must be remembered that Lenin predicted that the forces of communism would, in all probability, sweep over the Western world from the East. People who study the Mercator's projection of the world fail to understand how the nations of the Far East could sweep over the nations of the Western world like a tidal wave. To those who study global war, Lenin's statements are as clear as crystal. What is even more important, when Lenin had outlived his usefulness, he died or was removed. For people can understand how it was that Stalin, by a few ruthless, murderous moves, removed all those who, by reason of their activities in the Russian Revolution, were considered better qualified for leadership in the USSR and usurped power for himself. Those who study the WRM from the evidence presented in this book will understand why Stalin was chosen to follow Lenin. The old joint stock company principle was being put into effect again. American and British intelligence officers had exposed the parts of the international bankers at play in the Russian Revolution to their governments. In April 1919, the British government had issued a white paper on the subject. It was quickly suppressed, but a certain amount of damage had been done. The international bankers had been accused of financing international Jewry to put their plans for an international dictatorship into effect. The international bankers had to put some means of countering these impressions and ideas. The true picture of their utter ruthlessness is seen when it is pointed out that Stalin, a Gentile, was chosen by the international moneylenders, and that, acting on their instructions, he put Trotsky out of the way and proceeded to liquidate hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews in the purges which puts him in power. Following Lenin's death, this should prove to sincere but misguided people everywhere that the international bankers and their carefully selected agents and friends didn't consider the masses of the people of any race, color, or creed as other than expendable pawns in the game. It is true that many Jews became communists and followers of Karl Marx. They worked and fought to bring into being Karl Marx's published theories for an in- international of Soviet socialist republics. But they, like many Gentiles, were deceived. By the time Stalin was firmly seated in Moscow as the head agents of the international bankers, it was difficult to find any members of the first and second internationalisms alive. The manner in which the art conspirators used Grand Orient Masons and then had them liquidated as soon as they had served their purpose is just another illustration of the ruthlessness of those whose only good is Satan. Further evidence will be produced to prove that international bankers are not interested in anything else other than than obtaining for all their own small and very select group ultimate undisputed control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. The only honest thought in any of their minds is that they obviously believe that they are no superior in mental ability to the rest of mankind. That is, they are better able than other groups of individuals to manage the world's affairs. They are conceived that they are convinced that they can work out a plan of world government that is better than God's plan. And for this reason, they are determined to ultimately obliterate from the minds of all human beings all knowledge of good and his commandments, of God and his commandments, and substitute their own new order based on the theory that the state is supreme in all things, and the head of the state is, therefore, God Almighty upon this earth. The attempted deification of Stalin is proof of the statement. Once people become convinced of this great truth, they will realize that power of all races, colors, and creeds have been used and are still being used as the pawns in the game.